Hello and welcome to Leviathan News. I'm Sam McCullough. I'm joined by my good colleague Rex, and today we have on a special guest, Fiddy. Welcome.
Thank you.
Fiddy, give us a brief intro about yourself for the guests that don't know you.
All right. So I work as a core contributor for for Michael, who is the founder of Curve, and that's my current occupation. My job involves a lot of smart contract development, but then beyond that, um, I do something called dev biz, which is the opposite of biz dev, right? So you would say biz devs are 20% dev and 80% biz, and I would say I'm terrible at biz. But in general, what the job entails is talking to integrators, figuring out what they need. But most important is, of course, writing contracts for Curve, which is my full-time occupation. Beyond that,
Wonderful.
I also help advise Llama Risk, which is a
Great
team
team.
of analysts. Yeah, they are a team
I
of
like those guys.
analysts that do a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's more or less what I do.
So the pressing reason why you're here today is that we kicked Garrett off the show because he is not the Curve resident expert for today, and you are. So give us the rundown on what's happening with the supposed Curve USD deployment going on right now.
And
What?
actually, Fiddy, before
Yeah.
you tell us what's going on, just for people who don't have context. So for the last like 3 or 4 days, crypto Twitter has been going crazy because contracts from are being deployed. And depending on when you're looking at Twitter or what times, you might think that those contracts are different things. So we decided to clear everything up and just get Fiddy on here. So Fiddy, can you help us understand what is happening?
Yeah, sure. So we are trying to, so deployment processes are quite lengthy, I would say, depending on the complexity of the infrastructure that you're trying to deploy. And it involves coordination with several parties. It feels like, you know what, the blockchain is quite public. You can just kind of deploy whatever you like, but that's not always the case. You know, you have to coordinate with people. And this is exactly what's happening right now. So we are trying to deploy stuff. So there's Curve USD that's being deployed. I am also deploying a new iteration to the crypto swap contracts. And we are trying to use interesting new methods for deploying, which currently Etherscan has difficulty in verifying. And of course, we would like to have the contracts verified on Etherscan, because that seems to be the bare minimum that is necessary for safety, right? So, or transparency, I would say, not safety. So that's basically what's happening right now. We're trying to coordinate with Etherscan to add support for the deployment style that we have chosen. That would be the short description.
Can you talk about that? Because I've uploaded some. I've recreated ERC20 on like Polygon before just to see what it's like. And you know, you have your code in Ethereum Remix, you just deploy it and then you verify it and publish. So like what's happening differently with this Curve code that requires so much more work and close integration with the Etherscan team?
Yeah, as far as not just Etherscan, I mean, we also coordinate with Viper core developers, I would say. For example, there is a new EIP. The number is EIP 5202, which introduces an interesting new contract format for factory contracts, right? So the deployments, the factory is basically a smart contract that can deploy other contracts. For example, we have the stable swap factory, which deploys permissionless stable swap pools. And then you will have similar things with the controller, with the stablecoin, Curve stablecoin infrastructure. So there are many ways to deploy factories. You can do it through proxies and so on and so forth. And the EIP 5202 tries to do it slightly differently. And we decided to go that route because, well, why not, you know? So a lot of Curve is built on new innovation. And so this looks quite interesting. And yeah.
So obviously, there's very interesting stuff in like the more medium or the more question mark term that is like new functionality for Curve, right? Like the big one that is already being discussed is Curve USD. But just in terms of the things that are going on today, if you had to like bucket these in three buckets where it's like new functionality, optimizing the type of stuff that exists today, and like really working on like DevOps and like things behind the scenes, like new deployment methods, like where would you say is like the most energy and the most like progress that's being made in terms of like the things that just through crypto Twitter and stuff right
now? Just to understand your question, you want to ask what is the most amount of progress in these three categories, right?
Well, yeah, or just to rephrase, if that wasn't clear, when we from the outside are seeing all this activity, should we understand this as new functionality? Should we understand this as optimizations to the existing functionality? Or should we understand this as like truly behind the scenes DevOps stuff?
I think it's always a mix of three. Any kind of new paradigm that is being breached, you'll always have a mix of three. In the case of new functionality, you would say there's Curve stablecoin, which has new functionality to the that is offered to a DAO to accept, of course. There is the gas optimizations that are presented in Curve Crypto Swap, which is quite important, I would say. But gas optimizations are not the only improvement that is brought to the contract. There are other improvements which are necessary for integrations and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's the backend, let's say, DevOps processes that you talked about. So coming up with the Titanoboa, which is our preferred development tool for Viper contracts. Building Viper, that's quite important, you know. I mean, there's a lot of things that went into the backend, which was eventually used for the stablecoin and TriCrypto and all of these kind of infra, you know. So I like to think that Curve is involved in the entire vertical, right? So we have people who contribute to the Viper infra, and we have people who help with the dev tools. We have people who are building the smart contracts and so on and so forth. So it's quite nice too. So any kind of new deployment always involves these verticals, no matter what. I hope that answers your question, though.
So speaking of new deployments, you guys just deployed the new TriCrypto NG contracts. I believe it was yesterday. And Garrett called it potentially even bigger than the CRV USD that's coming out. So what exactly was this NG deployment for TriCrypto, and how is it going to benefit Curve?
Yeah, so to give you some context, NG just means next gen, but actually, you know, it's just a fun name. I was thinking about calling it NGMI, so next gen math improvements. So basically, the Curve V2 contracts have a bunch of math in it, and when they first came out, and actually to this day, all the existing Curve V2 contracts, they are quite good, but they involve a lot of calculations that are not necessarily gas optimal. This is like old synthetic days. You know, synthetics had the same issues with gas that made their protocol not that usable or not that user friendly. And I would say Curve V2 has definitely those issues where the swap costs may not be that nice for people who want to swap a small size, for example, or for MEV bots, for example, so on and so forth, right? And what TriCrypto NG tries to do is it brings in new mathematics. It tries to bring in better oracles. It tries to do all of these things better, I would say, better view methods for integrators. It tries to solve the problem if it ever existed for only reentrancy bugs and so on and so forth. And it tries to do all of that. And the consequences you do see, or at least based on my tests, you do see a significant reduction in swap costs. And this is very important, actually. So if your swaps, if your exchanges are cheaper, you can not only offer better, I would say, not only offer better transaction fees, right? So Ethereum transaction fees, but you would also offer better swap costs because it's cheaper, slightly cheaper for arbitragers. So arbitragers can arbitrage your pool earlier, let's say, right? So for example, assume that you have a contract that costs no gas, and you have a contract, the same thing that costs n amount of gas. Arbitragers obviously would profit more if they arbitrage the pool contract that had lower gas costs, and that plays a role, right? So there are a lot of these things that are quite relevant. But what I like about and actually I'm quite a big fan of Curve V2, the design, it's that every exchange also involves potentially rebalancing liquidity. So both exchange and liquidity rebalancing is that's the thing that's the difference with the Curve V2 and, for example, something like Uniswap V3, where the rebalancing of liquidity is entirely delegated to the liquidity provider. They take the risks of rebalancing. Whereas in Curve V2, there's a very simple, predictable algorithm that rebalances liquidity equally for all liquidity providers. And this is a key distinction. But traders rebalance liquidity. And that's the reason why it's very hard to compete against Uniswap V3, where the liquidity rebalancing is actually significantly more expensive than what Curve does. But Curve just tries to stuff everything together and automate the process as much as possible. And yeah, that's the reason why I like the design. It's a little bit more predictable, a little bit more permissionless, and so on and so forth. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. No, that was a super clear answer. And just like to add on a little bit, another piece, it's like from the normal user's perspective, it's just like we use aggregators, we don't use DEXs directly, right? And like a huge way of driving more aggregate volume is just making sure that like the metrics are better, and like what that comes down to is fees and gas. And so it sounds like what you are saying is like we're seriously addressing these concerns.
Yeah, it's a big concern. And if anybody is listening to this, you should always be using an aggregator for swaps, and you should always be careful with your execution, right? So these are things that we really deeply care about. So
yeah. So Fiddy, last question before we let you go, but this is a tough one because like you have something so huge in front of you, which is Curve USD, and you should be focused on shipping that and like the exciting things that unlock. But just taking a step back outside of like maybe Curve directly and looking at the whole Ethereum ecosystem, like what are you personally particularly excited about, like what you're seeing happening, and yeah, like what gets you up in the morning?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say the most interesting part for me is looking at the extractable value behind each transaction, right? So that's the most interesting topic for me personally. Things like order flow, paying, like having your order flow, like auctioning your order flow, for example. These are topics that are quite interesting to me because they can help make our financial system that we try to build slightly better and more on par with the traditional finance world. That's number one. And number two is it's also a very big centralization risk, right? So MEV that is being extracted involves a lot of parties. It involves a lot of verticals, and what you can start to observe is it's the same party in each vertical that is trying to capture the entire market, the entire market. And that is a significant centralization vector. So it's important to monitor the development in the MEV world and see what's happening there. And and for example, for me especially, I like to see how MEV evolves, for example, on Arbitrum, which tries to do this fair order sequencing, and on Ethereum, which doesn't really have fair order sequencing, right? It doesn't have that. And then I guess we will realize, like a lot of people really dislike the fair order sequencing logic. They say there's no such thing. And there are some people who are like swear by it. And the reality is nobody really knows what is the right approach. And the only way, well, I am an experimentalist, so I like to experiment and I want to watch the experiments. So the only way we can know is by observing and experimenting. So this is what it wakes me up in the morning.
Got it. So curve block builder confirmed. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Fiddy, what do you think of some of the vertical integrations that you're seeing? So just recently we had Flashbots MEV Share was just announced. And I know there's a few other projects which are trying to integrate the full stack of both having the RPC, which is the relaying plus the block building. What are your thoughts on this?
It's exciting. So I think well, it depends on how, I guess you have to ask the question, who gets the portion or who gets the MEV share really? Like, for example, does a validator get, what percentage of the MEV does the validator get? What percentage of the MEV does the MEV origin get, the originator of MEV? And then there are different approaches. So Flashbots has this Flashbot like MEV share, which I have to say, I haven't really looked into it quite well, but you already have something close to it. So the Gnosis team, for example, the team behind CowSwap, Gnosis, and all that, they have something called MEV blocker, which I think is a very, very, very interesting tool for anybody who's using.
Do you think this is kind of like the end state where the sandwich attacks are essentially taken out, and what's left is the back run plus a fee rebate? Do you think that's the most optimal on the user side? Plus, what's optimal for the MEV searcher side as well too?
MEV is a little bit of a cat and mouse game too. So I guess ideally what you would like, yes, the end game would be, I would make a swap. Let's say the swap has some inefficiency, and we now offer a third party to fill up the gap caused by the inefficiency that I introduced. And then I get some of the inefficiency recovered, right? So that's the, I would say that's the utopian version. But sometimes MEV cannot be that is not that transparent. Sometimes when you see a bundle and you say, okay, there's no front running involved, that may not necessarily be true. It depends on the front runner and how there are lots of intricate details here. So I would say yes, that is a utopia that nobody gets sandwiched. But unfortunately, we will find out over time that these MEV bots that are very good at sandwiching will become very good at disguising their sandwiches also, I guess. So it'll be interesting to see.
Okay, exactly.
It's always going to be a cat and mouse game. So we are always going to do that. And our goal as we all have responsibilities. So you as a user must use some sort of protection, right? Otherwise, you're just going to give free lunch to MEV bots. I, as a protocol developer, must consider MEV into my design process. I should not be exposing it. And the MEV process should also be, you should consider it as the Ethereum core devs must consider it, the RPC endpoint provider, all of these things. Everybody must take ownership of minimizing it on their vertical, We can't offload it to one entity called Flashbots and expect them to, make our lives better. We all must do our part, I think so.
Yeah, it's interesting how the technological advances in the kind of overall infrastructure space, both on the block building side and the relaying side, are creating these new interesting concepts that developers are starting to have to work with, like you said, and that contracts, these immutable contracts that may have been deployed, 3 years ago, 4 years ago already now. It's they don't have those either thoughts or protections built in, and it's up to developers now to kind of like build something new and then try to figure out how do we take the what we have in these old contracts and move it up to the new ones, and how do we work with that ever evolving landscape in the Ethereum ecosystem.
I just want to say one small thing here. I think Michael said it best. There is no such thing as immutability, right? Because you can always migrate liquidity, for example, So
I think the SEC
yes.
agrees too.
So
I mean, you guys
yeah.
were in the curve specifically was named in that document. I believe it was the exchange rules last week, where they said that, you know what, if we want to change curve, we just have to get everybody to sell off their CRV tokens, and then we can buy them at a cheap price, and then we can force the protocol to change.
Oh, damn, that would be crazy.
Yeah. So just to run through some of the other headlines for today, the IMF is giving Argentina a $45 billion bailout, but they want some anti-crypto clauses in there for anti-money laundering. Oh, we lost Fiddy. There you go. Okay, you're back. Yeah, just so in addition to that, ARS is going to be looking at Puerto Rico for tax haven audits. And the big news of the day yesterday was that the Coinbase was going to sue the SEC to get clarity on their rulemaking process. And I thought this one was interesting because Coinbase has really been petitioning for rulemaking for, I believe, a year at least. And the SEC has been sitting on their hands. And so now they're taking it to the federal courts to try to force the agency to provide comments on what Coinbase had asked for in this rulemaking process. Chief Legal Officer Paul Grayall said that from the SEC's public statements and enforcement activity in the crypto industry, it seems like the SEC has already made up its mind to deny our petition, but they haven't told the public yet. So the action Coinbase filed today simply asks the court to ask the SEC to share its decision. And the suit filed by Coinbase is a writ of mandamus, a type of lawsuit for exceptional circumstances in which a court can force federal officials to act. And the petition is being led by Eugene Scalia, son of former court justice and Anthony Scalia, and former Secretary of Labor. So good luck to them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think I've said this before, but I think like it turns out that like when regulation gets involved, like the people that have the most like firepower and ability to do stuff, it turns out is like the one company that went public. And you know, it's like the one thing that's like super like opposite of crypto ethos. Like they went on the public markets and traditional finance, like centralized, like through, you know, all this like funny stuff. But you know, I think it goes to show that like in order to create the crypto that we know will change the world, like it requires engagement, and it requires these like touch points and like people with resources that like aren't just like rage quitting and moving to Dubai because like some like, you know, lizard man is like making dumb like suing dumb projects about dumb things. Like there are people that like are really like putting their careers and their reputations and their own dollars on the line, and like that is the path forward, not just like fuck you, we're leaving.
Yeah, and actually the worst part of it that I see is the incessant Fed posting by many people who are taking the words of unelected bureaucrats' arguments and opinions that have yet to go through the courts as word that the entire crypto industry is broken and should be shut down. So if you're one of those people who's parroting what the AG is saying, or Gary, or anybody else, without having a definitive court opinion, you should probably think differently and maybe look at your Fed posting.
Yeah, I mean, the courts are broken in their own way.
Exactly. But this is a talk for another time. We're already running late. Fiddy, thank you so much for coming on to the show today. We really appreciate your insight into the Curve dev biz ecosystem. Thank you. And we will have to have you back on once the Curve USD launches. Or the Curve block builder launches. Exactly.
No, that's not happening. But thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, right, no, anytime you ever want to talk Curve or the news, you know where to come.
Exactly. Today is April 25th, 2023, and this is Leviathan News. We will see you tomorrow.